The Democratic National Alliance has received quite a number of emails asking us what will we do to ensure that there's good governance. Well, there are several things that we've said over and repeatedly that we'll do, God willing, when we become the government. Firstly, we would like to introduce proportionate representation. Proportionate representation basically means that you have the number of seats in the House of Assembly based on the number of votes. Secondly, the Freedom of Information Act must be introduced. We've seen over and repeatedly over the past few years the lack of information being given to the Bahamian people. That is first on our legislative agenda. The introduction of an independent Attorney General. We've seen where recently the Attorney General in the Bahamas has been caused to be conflicted in many instances, and that is something that we have to address. Time limits or term limits for the Prime Minister. We want to put in place that the Prime Minister will or cannot be the Prime Minister for more than 2 terms. That's significant to us. We've seen over the years with Prime Ministers just don't know when to go. We have in our DNA's Constitution that the leader of the DNA cannot be Prime Minister for more than 2 terms. We want to make that law. We also want to limit the powers of the Prime Minister. They're very exhausted, and in the hands of one person can be very, very dangerous. And of course, we ought to fix a date for the elections. I don't think the Prime Minister alone should determine when the elections would be and surprise you. But determining a date and having a fixed date is something that we wouldn't want to do as a government. Indeed, introducing fixed constituencies would be a must, and getting rid of gerrymandering, something that these parties do every year, every election cycle, the good Lord sends. Having that fixed would be more democratic and I think fair in the circumstances. No doubt we will have to introduce a recall system. The MPs usually come around every 5 years. We want to have it so that the constituents are able to recall their MPs in the event they fail to represent them the way they ought to. And moving on from that, a Code of Conduct Act must be introduced for public officials, whereby a standard must be developed that they must comply with. And in addition to that, the MPs must, under a DNA government, ensure that there's a development plan for their constituencies. And they must bring that plan to the House of Assembly, introduce that plan, and continue to speak on that plan throughout the 5-year period. We believe if you're an MP, you ought to represent, and you ought to represent well, and we will introduce where they must have a plan to follow. Needless to say, the Public Disclosure Act must be amended and given more teeth, whereby we take the approval by the Prime Minister in collaboration with the Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, and the Attorney General. We take all of that out and we give the Public Disclosure Act more teeth. There's certainly no doubt that electoral reform is necessary, and in addition to that, electoral finance reform must be a must that will be introduced under our watch. We know that the public service and its efficiency is essential to the running of government, and that is something that we have to look at. We have to review the public orders to make sure that they are 21st century compliant, so that we are able to not only be efficient in doing business within the Bahamas, but internationally as well. And the introduction of the Office of the Ombudsman. The Office of the Ombudsman would be a watchdog for the people against the government, something that is needed, something that is working in other first world countries. The DNA will introduce. And last but not least, there is a need for local government in New Providence. We must start to take a lot of the powers of the central government out of the hands of the central government, start to reduce it. Local government in the Bahamas that has the power to effect changes, to ensure that there are things that can be done to improve our island would be necessary.